Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back with all of you once again. And I'm happy to be here to think about the theme of wintering. When Iris mentioned the monthly theme to me and I started thinking about that, it was tougher than I thought it was going to be to kind of decide where to land on that. And I think part of the reason why I struggled with what direction to go with wintering is because that word can go so many different directions. Not sure what's going on here. That word can go a lot of different directions. Wintering, if you're talking about livestock, it's, feeding your stock over the winter. If you're talking about sort of our modern conception of wintering in modern consumer culture, wintering is about rest and recovery and self-care. For a lot of people, wintering means, meditation and reflection and mentally and emotionally preparing for the coming year. So there's a lot of different definitions of that term. And in some respects, I feel torn between two winters. And not just because the temperature these days seems to kind of bounce up and down like an excited terrier. I'm torn between sort of, our pop culture vision of winter and wintering. It's supposed to be joyous and festive and in a winter wonderland. On the other hand, there's the kind of historical winter. And to borrow a phrase from, George R.R. Martin and Game of Thrones, the ominous historical memory that inevitably winter is coming and it's probably not going to be good. The more I thought about that, the more I realized that what direction you go with remarks on wintering depends upon what kind of winter that you want to focus on. And it occurs to me to wonder if an interesting thing has happened in modern times regarding our conception of winter. Maybe it's changed a bit. Long before, winter as self-care, rest, reflection, seasonal celebration, peppermint mocha frappes and all that, the approach of winter, historically speaking, was a time of dread, a time of scarcity, uncertainty, as everyone braced for more cold and dark and hunger. And what I think is interesting is when I first started talking about winter, thinking about winter rather, what occurred to me was that in these more recent winters of rising energy prices and COVID and contested elections and seemingly endless political and social divisions, it seems to me that maybe in some ways we're moving backwards more toward the idea of winter as a terrible time of stress, as opposed to the winter wonderland ideal. And it occurs to me as a historian to think that it's interesting that I'm thinking more these days about the scary winters of yore than about, the kind of romantic winters maybe of my childhood. What really got me thinking about it was in thinking about readings for today. I had occasion to reread Laura Ingalls Wilder's 1940, The Long Winter. And this is one of the most beloved of the Little House books, one of 3 Wilder books that are listed in the top 100 of the best children's books of all time by the Library Journal. I read the Little House books when I was a kid, and I really loved The Long Winter. That was my favorite when I was a kid. Set in the Dakota Territories during the legendary winter of 1880-1881, the novel documents as well as any that I've seen, how families, on the frontiers scraped and survived and struggled during those years. But I gotta say that as a child, all of that was lost on me. And even in thinking about the Little House books, as an adult looking backwards, that's still all lost to me. All I tend to remember is a beloved family that I know well from my childhood, getting through winter. But in rereading portions of the book for this morning, it was fascinating. I wasn't a 12-year-old. I was an almost 50-year-old history teacher who, for some reason, when I think about winter now, I don't think about the home and hearth of the Ingalls family. I think about the terrible winters of the past. It's a vivid look at the harsh realities of pioneer life and what it takes to survive. The blizzard forces the Ingalls family to abandon their home in the countryside and move into town, where they eventually become snowbound. As the blizzard grinds on over the months, the rail lines become impassable, the town is cut off. That storm eventually lasted 7 months. The town was on the brink of starvation, nearly out of fuel, and then finally, when things were at a crisis point, the blizzard lifted, the rail lines were opened, and the Ingalls received their long-awaited Christmas barrel containing clothes and food and presents from the Reverend Alden, and the novel closes with the family finally celebrating their happy Christmas together in May. Now, perhaps because of the happy ending, or the fact that I was 12, or the fact that I knew them from the television show, I really didn't remember that novel being at all scary. I didn't remember the terrors of winter. All I remembered was the charm of family and home and hearth. But in rereading, it made me think a lot more about other readings on winter that I was familiar with, such as, for example, The Darkling Thrush. You know, when I read The Darkling Thrush, you know, I hear fundamentally a hopeless story of decay. A narrator so isolated and lonely that when he hears the hopeful song of the thrush, he can't even get his head around it. He can't even imagine why this hopeful sound exists when all around is so bleak. You know, as the poem said, so little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh aground, that I could think there trembled through his happy good night air some blessed hope whereof he knew, and I was unaware. Now, I had initially chosen The Darkling Thrush and the Wilder excerpt because of their seemingly opposite message and tone. What was interesting was as I reread them, thinking about the message for this morning, how similar that they started to feel to me. Because when you get right down to it, winter as kind of bleak, desolate, terrifying place, that's a lot deeper rooted in our history than the modern conception of a winter wonderland. The anonymous 10th century British poem, The Wanderer, for example, asserted, "So this middle earth falls and fails each day. A man may not become wise before he owns a share of winters in the kingdom of this world." And to me, this is a reminder of what winter was for millennia. You know, a person's share of winters is both a reference to the seasons that mark their lives and also acknowledges that winter represents the daily and inevitable struggles that we all face. The most famous winters in our history are not so because of their charms, but because of their dangers. The winter of 1610 in the English colony of Jamestown, for example, is forever known as the starving time. Weather, disease, famine, clashes with local tribes saw 2/3 of Jamestown colonists die before relief ships arrived in 1610. George Percy described about as bleak a winter scene as you could imagine. Having fed upon horses and other beasts as long as they lasted, we were glad to make shift to vermin, dogs, cats, rats, mice. And now, the famine beginning to look ghastly and pale in every face, nothing was spared to maintain life and do those things which seemed incredible, such as to dig out corpses of graves and to eat them. And some have even licked up the blood which has fallen from their weak fellows. It's grim stuff. The Great Frost of 1709, known in France as Le Grand Hiver, was the coldest winter of the past 500 years. The cold and ice that winter had massive geopolitical implications. Wrong page, there we go. King Charles VII of Sweden, the Lion of the North, very famously invaded Russia that winter, and was one of the first of many lessons that different countries would learn about not invading that country during that time of the year. And Charles was defeated, and the Swedish Empire, which, believe it or not, was a thing at one point, was really no more after that. One song about that campaign begins, "The coldest winter in our memory was 1709. Then later goes on to say, from the perspective of the Swedish soldiers fighting in Russia, "We cut our way through forests, crossed on frozen streams. They fell away before us like a murmur in a dream. And they burned the land around us as the snow closed in, and the arms of winter took us all as we fired against the wind." Member of Continental Congress Governor Morris from New York visited George Washington's army at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777, and a bleak scene greeted him there as well. "An army of skeletons appeared before our eyes, naked, starved, sick, and discouraged. The unfortunate soldiers were in want of everything. They had neither coats nor hats, nor shoes, nor shirts. Their feet and legs froze until they were black. If you go back and look at the kind of history of brutal winters, there's a seemingly endless supply of named winters in both the Western and Eastern hemispheres. The Great Snow of 1717 dropped 5 feet of snow on New England. There was the 1922 Knickerbocker storm, which was named that because 28 inches of snow fell in one day in Washington, D.C., collapsing the roof of the Knickerbocker Theater, killing almost 100 people and trapping many more. The 1950 Great Appalachian Storm killed 362 inches of snow fell in West Virginia. And then I have to mention, just for my own sake, the 1993 Storm of the Century, which cost $5.5 billion to taxpayers. But I guess on the bright side, it got 20-year-old Scott out of classes at Hiram College for a full week. So it was quite a storm. And in thinking about that, I was drawn by the fact that when I thought about wintering, for some reason, I didn't think about the positive Ingalls family memories very long. I started thinking about the horrible winters of my historian self. And it made me think that maybe that's the past couple of years, and us being a little angry that it's our winter wonderland are being messed up by COVID and all the stress and all these political divisions. In some weird way, it's comforting to me that if we look back at these horrible winters, we can remind ourselves, no, winter has always been this dark time. And maybe our job with winters is not so much to expect it to be wonderful, but to reflect and look ahead to spring, because spring is coming. Maybe this helps us remember that we have to look to each other and look to spring. Let us love winter, for it is the spring of genius, wrote the 16th century Italian poet Pietro Aretino. When you get right down to it, maybe that is what we need the cold and the dark to do. It puts things in perspective. I think about Anne Bradstreet, who in 1664 wrote in her Meditations, Divine and Moral, "If we had no winter, the spring would not be so pleasant. If we did not sometimes taste of adversity, the prosperity would not be welcome." 1616, for example, was known as the year without summer. Cold temperatures across the globe saw an extended winter last, from mid-fall all the way until midsummer in North America and Europe. There was a foot of snow in Vermont in June that year. But on the other hand, that same gloomy extended winter led to an extended period of gloom and darkness and cold temperatures descending upon Lake Geneva. And the gloom of that spring and summer of 1816 is what motivated Mary Shelley and her friends to devise various games to pass the time, and out of that came the novel Frankenstein. American painter Andrew Wyeth struck a similar chord in writing about his landscaping paintings that he loved so much. He wrote, "I prefer winter and fall, when you feel the bone structure of the landscape, the loneliness of everything, the dead feelings of winter, because something waits beneath it, and the whole story does not show." In the end, I guess our response to winter has not changed. We are safer and happier when we face it together, when we remember that winter is often hard, it has always been that way, but that eventually spring is coming. No winter lasts forever, no spring skips its turn, declared the naturalist and author Hal Borland. April is a promise that is kept in May, and we all know it. And in the end, I wonder if that's really the takeaway from the rereading of The Long Winter. I picked it up again, thinking to find a heartfelt and warm, nostalgic story of a family surviving winter. And then once I read it, I was somewhat terrified, focusing on the hardships and the dangers and wondering where the romantic, wonderful novel of my childhood went. But eventually I hit back on the idea that, no, fundamentally, the lesson that The Long Winter teaches us is perhaps that not that winter is coming, but that spring is coming. And I pulled a little excerpt out of there, out of Long Winter to close. I think about this little passage, and it gives me a great deal of optimism. "It can't beat us," Pa said. "Can it, Pa?" Laura asked stupidly. "No," said Pa. "It's got to quit sometime, and we don't. It can't lick us. We won't give up. Then Laura felt a warmth inside her. It was very small, but it was strong. It was steady, like a tiny light in the dark, and it burned very low, but no winds could make it flicker because it would not give up. Thank you.